to the second part of Gap 1, where we're going to look at specific research methods. Mystery shopping is the first one on our list. I don't know whether any of you have been familiar with mystery shopping before, but this is where you hire an outside person, many times a professional, although I've had students actually do this in a project when I was at San Francisco State for Hyatt in San Francisco, where you go in and you stay in a hotel and you take part in different services being offered, room service, check-ins, check-outs, all of that, and you're evaluating them along the way as to how they're doing. Restaurants, same kind of thing. And you're anonymous. They don't know who you are. Now there's a company based in Asia, actually, Institute for Hospitality Management, which does this as a professional aspect, and you hire them to come in, and they have various packages they put together. They give impartial assessments, as it says, industry recognition criteria that they go through, which they can compare you to others, online solutions, global availability. They do all of that. It's a very interesting profession to be in, actually. You're getting to stay in hotels and evaluate them along the way, but you got to remember that you're getting paid good money to do this, so it's not just for fun. In the meetings and events area, which we haven't talked a lot about, but it's an area that's a critical element within our in our industry in terms of how we go about looking at those kind of things. Here's some suggestions when you're looking at how to do strategic management. Survey the current volume of meetings, who's planning meetings, what type of meetings, and so on, to be able to know a little bit more about that in terms of the kind of client that you're looking at, the customer and the type of meeting that you're holding. The stakeholders, who are they? What are their needs? What are their aspects of it? And benchmarking that against others so that you can compare where you're at with regards to the customers' expectations, and also looking at their perceptions in terms of what they've actually experienced in various meetings. The critical incident method is one I like. In fact, it's really the behind what you're doing for your peer-to-peer review projects in terms of evaluating some experiences that you've actually had with regards to a service, whether it was good or bad. In fact, what you're going to do here in critical incidents, and we'll look at this as a whole here in terms of what your experiences were, a response to failure. Okay, a response to failure is when something was unavailable or slow. All right, so more specifically in terms of what they define it as, is it represents how well the service provider responds to a service encounter when something went wrong. Okay, so something went wrong, that's a failure. Response to needs, on the other hand, doesn't necessarily have to be something that went wrong, could be something that went right. So response to need is, I asked for something special, I asked for a special menu item, I asked for something there, a preference. I admitted that it was my error in terms of what I ordered for that meal, for example, and some potentially disruption to others. That's a response to needs as well. So it could be both a positive and a negative, and it's how the provider handled it. Unprompted, unsolicited are those where you could be really positive. Somebody gave you extreme attention to your customer aspect of it, something out of the ordinary, or it could be adverse. I can tell you a positive one. I remember years ago I was having lunch at a little diner restaurant near where I lived in Las Vegas with my mom. And the service was kind of slow, but we weren't really paying much attention to that. We were having a good time talking. She was visiting from the Midwest where she lived. And the server came over and said, you know, service has been so slow, we're going to give you a free dessert. I said, wow, thank you very much. I didn't ask for that. We didn't look for that. That's an unprompted, unsolicited. Now, I'm sure you can all think of adverse situations where you've had an unprompted, unsolicited along the way. So I won't go into a lot of details on that. So this is a little chart to help you kind of track which they are. So if you think about these in terms of your own incident that you wrote about, in terms of your posting on those peer-to-peer sites, if it was a system failure, automatically, yes, it's a response to failure. If it wasn't a system failure, in other words, it wasn't something that was the normal way that it was going to be done or expected to be done, then you have to ask, was it a request for a special accommodation? Or, something that just happened. So, yes, as a response to needs. No, it's unprompted, unsolicited. Let's look at this chart right here, which is the initial first surveys that were done with this method when it was first introduced in the research methods. This is actually a Midwestern university where they were hospitality students like you, and these were some of their incidents, and so we'll look at yours and see where they fall. If you look at the airlines, for example, what you see, Group 1 represents response to failure. Group 2 is response to need, and Group 3 would be unprompted, unsolicited. And there's satisfactory on the top and dissatisfactory, if you will, on the bottom. So if you look at the airlines, the highest satisfactory level came from response to needs. So when people ask for something special, they got it. And you think about the flight attendant, that's a big part of their job, right? The dissatisfactory came under response to failure. In other words, something that didn't work right the way it was supposed to. Somebody lost a reservation, something happened, the flight didn't go when it was supposed to, all those kind of things. And so that was a fairly high level. Now, if you look over to the restaurant industry, you see a different perspective. Where is the highest level of satisfactory? It's in unprompted, unsolicited, 52.1. Where is the highest dissatisfactory? Unprompted, unsolicited, 50.3. So what does that tell you? Unprompted, unsolicited, 50% satisfactory, 50% dissatisfactory. Is that good? Is that what you'd like? I don't know. If I'm a manager, I don't want a 50-50 chance that the customer is going to have a good or bad unprompted, unsolicited. I'd prefer that it be the good unprompted, unsolicited, wouldn't you? Now, looking at hotels, again, a little bit different perspective. Also, the highest number of satisfactory came in unprompted, unsolicited, but they also had a very high level of response to needs. On the other hand, when you look at dissatisfactory, in the case of the hotels, it was the system's failure. Things did not work they were supposed to. A reservation wasn't there when you arrived. The guest room you were given wasn't the one that you had requested, and so on and so on and so on. So these are the kinds of issues we want to look at, and being able to diagnose that in terms of your own situation when you're using this kind of method. What is it that customers are perceiving? What is it they expected? What are they perceiving? Another way to look at these is measuring service quality through surveys, various surveys. We can think of customer satisfaction surveys, but these are service quality surveys. They're a little different. If we can look at an importance performance matrix, we can see how customers rated us on one column in terms of what they expected, and in the other one, what they actually got. And so we want to look at how important was it to them, and then how well did we perform. So if it was, as you see in the upper left-hand corner, a high importance and high performance, that's great. Excuse me. The right side. These charts, sometimes we have to look at them backward and forward. Okay, so we want to emphasize those. Attributes to emphasize. Those are ones high importance, high performance. If it's high importance, but low performance, those are the ones we have to improve. And those are the most critical ones, because if we don't do those, we're going to lose those customers that think it's high. Now, what if it's over here in the lower right-hand side? You see low leverage aspects of it. So it's not really that important. We're performing very well. So we want to be able to maintain those, but that's not something that we're going to be spending a lot of time emphasizing. And then when we look down here, low importance and low performance, frankly, those are things we shouldn't be worrying a lot about. And when you look at this sounds pretty reasonable, but a lot of times we find, and I've found personally, that we spend more time trying to correct some of the low importance, low performance things than we do some of the high importance ones. So we need to understand where they are in order to know what we're doing. When we look at trying to measure that customer gap and actually using expectations and perceptions, we want to track those. And so what we have here, when you see, hold on a second, sorry about that, skipped one slide too. Let me back that up a minute. Okay, if expectations and perceptions do not match, what you have is a customer gap, right? So then we have to start diagnosing where the problem is from there. So if we look at the dimensions that we've talked about and the reliability, what does this chart show you? Okay, these are the reliability, zones of tolerance, right? These are the zones of tolerance within the reliability area. So how are we performing based on this? when you look at the actual chart. We're below it in terms of reliability. We're below it in terms of responsiveness. We're right at the bottom in terms of assuredness, right at the bottom in terms of empathy, and tangibles were in good shape. So if this were the case, what would you be saying? You'd be saying, all right, we got a great facility, but we're not delivering on the service elements. Now, if you look at a hospitality chart, there are two different surveys that have been created. We're also created in a different Midwestern university than the one previously mentioned, that looked at both a serve qual, which we're going to talk about in a minute, general survey put into the restaurant industry, and another one into the lodging. And what you're seeing in terms of these are, you're seeing where they stand. The blue line being the lodge serve. So reliability was the highest level. Responsiveness, not so high. Empathy wasn't very good, right? Empathy was kind of low in terms of where they were at. If you look at the dining aspect of it, fairly similar, except they were a little bit less on the assurance side of it, also down in the empathy side, fairly similar in terms of where the issues were in terms of what we're doing. And if you look at these in terms of the priority, we talk about this in terms of the dimensions, which we talked about in the previous section, which Group 1.1 dealt with. In the case of DineServe, the restaurant aspect of it, reliability was first, then tangibles, then assurance, responsiveness, and empathy. In terms of the lodging side of it, it was reliability first, so both were reliability first. Then it's different. Assurance was second, responsiveness, tangibles, and then empathy. I don't know whether that's your experience or not. That's what these particular surveys found. Now the ServQual, which you'll find in your textbook, measures those expectations and perceptions, and the others, the ones that I just showed you, are taking those same terminology, those same areas, and putting them into the context of a restaurant or a hotel. So it's expectations minus perceptions. So the first four questions are based on tangibles, then the next are reliability, responsiveness, assurance, and empathy in terms of the survey itself. So it measures the gaps, it looks at customers, managers, and employees. If it's done right, we have all three being surveyed. Gap 1 is when the customer's expectation versus the manager's expectations are not the same. That's gap 1. Gaps 2 to 4 come when the customer's expectations and perceptions versus the manager's and the employee's expectations and perceptions. So we'll talk more about those 2 and 4 down the road, but 1 basically is saying here what we're looking at is when the customer's expectation and the manager's expectations don't match. So the experience industry related measurements, restaurants, DineServe, lodging, LodgeServe, hospitality as an entire industry, WholeServe kind of combines all those. In that case, they take the employees, they just call responsiveness, assurance, and empathy the employees. Then you have tangibility and reliability. And then there's also something that I've added in here called the service quality audit. I'll give you a little background on that. What it is you determine the frequency of how often the error happens. And then you assign a recovery cost. Okay, how much does it cost from a labor standpoint, from a material standpoint, whatever it might be. And then you establish a probability of how often that's going to happen. You determine the annual cost, and then you begin to look at the service recovery process in terms of the priorities there. So if you look at the cost, the recovery cost, that's the cost to fix a particular problem. Okay, the cost of the error is the cost to actually fix it. The opportunity cost is the value of future sales and the frequency of the error. Those are the two opportunity costs. So you have recovery cost plus opportunity cost equals the cost of error. Remember that. Important, good multiple choice type question. You have a recovery cost, opportunity cost, and recovery cost plus the opportunity cost equals the cost of the error. What's wrong with it? So if you look at this particular scenario, this was done on a hotel in New York. This was done a while ago, so some of these terminologies may be a little bit outdated. But when somebody was given the wrong room, the recovery cost was $2.40. The opportunity cost was $1.51. So annually, based on the number of times that it actually happened, it only cost them $5,700. Now you look at the others down there and you see the lost folio, lost registration, no tax exemption. Those are kind of little errors on there. No tax exemption cost $50,000. The lost registration, $50,000. The priority club not being there, $50,000. But the biggest one is unposted charge. So the recovery cost is only $1, but the opportunity cost, they might not ever come back again, is $8.64. So it's the least costly, but the most frequent and the biggest opportunity cost, and therefore it costs you the most. And so the idea of the service quality audit is to see where you should set your priority. Is it on what seems the most obvious, or is it on what actually cost you the most amount of money in lost revenue, or the total cost of the error, if you will? And these are the group discussion questions, which Group 2.1 will discuss with you in class, and we'll all enjoy discussing those. So thank you very much, and that ends our next lecture.